So, you want to work in a zoo? Well, you're in the right place. We're going to be talking to zookeepers, researchers, conservationists and many more people about their careers. We will discuss how they got into doing what they do now, and of course we'll be asking them for their advice to those that aspire to work with animals or for animals and the natural world. So, Jo, I believe you have something else to add to the start of this podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Ollie. So this podcast is going out on the UN International Women and Girls in Science Day. So this day pushes for gender equality in STEM subjects and also aims to break down perceived barriers preventing more girls going into science careers. So we're really lucky at Wild Planet Trust. We have got loads of women in key managerial and particularly STEM roles, including who we're talking to today. So welcome, Kirsten.
Hi.
So we like to start with a quick intro. So Ollie, I'm going to pass to you for that one.
No problem. So obviously this is Kirsten, but Kirsten, just who are you? Obviously you have titles as well.
I do. So I'm Dr. Kirsten Pullen and I am the Chief Scientific Officer for the Wild Planet Trust.
Excellent stuff. And we always like to ask this question at the start. What is the weirdest job that you've ever had?
Oh, weirdest job. Well, technically not a job because I was volunteering at the time, but I did spend one summer looking at owl pellets to tease them apart and look for the bones of small mammals so we could get an idea of what the owls were eating.
It's a satisfying thing, though.
Having worked
for Barn Owl Trust in the past.
Yeah.
Do you know what the most satisfying thing is? You probably did this as well. When you find the lower jaw, pulling the tooth all the way out.
Pulling the tooth out so you can identify the species of mouse.
You're looking at it so weird now, but
I
it's
have
really
no context
interesting
for this, so it is kind of
it's
a little bit strange. But
I'll find you a pellet. In fact, we've got a pellet lurking somewhere. I'll find it for you, and you can
maybe
find
we'll
out how
make that a
satisfying.
future video or something, and we can do something more on it. Okay.
So there you go.
Pretty interesting.
So it's interesting rather
Very
than
strange
weird to me. Okay, so you're obviously at the very top level of the Wild Planet Trust at the moment, but as this is a careers podcast, we want to go right back to the beginning and think about how you got here. So can you give us a bit of a potted history of your career path?
Okay, so career path, if I weave in the academic and the practical, because I have tried to do a little bit of both. So first off, after doing my A-levels, I went straight into university. I did a general applied biology degree because I wasn't entirely certain where I wanted to go. And then I took a year out and volunteered for the Devon Wildlife Trust, identifying and surveying lichens in some of their woods.
God.
Slightly different.
Yeah.
I then got a place on a master's degree with Bangor University in Ecology. And then started volunteering at the Welsh Mountain Zoo, which was just down the road. A job came up as a keeper, and at that point I actually wasn't going to stay working in zoos. I wanted to get a little bit of experience working with animals, and then I was going to I wanted to be a field biologist. But as I spent time working, and particularly when I became a chimp keeper, I also began to realise what the true value of zoos were, not just in terms of working with the animals, making sure they had good lives, looking at the conservation projects, but engaging with the public and trying to get them to think in new ways about conservation and what we do. So that sort of then fed into my choices. I decided to stay in zoo work. I have to admit, my parents went, "What are you doing?" And I then moved down to Bristol Zoo, where I became the Head of Primates on section there for a while, before then coming down to Paignton Zoo as a research officer.
Yeah.
Now, in between doing the Masters and then coming down to do my PhD at Paignton, I did the City and Guilds Animal Management, which is now the Diploma of the Management Zoo Aquarium Animals that our keepers do. So my education history reads a bit weirdly because it's degree, masters,
up and back down,
City and Guilds, PhD, which is not your standard way of doing it, but it was appropriate for the career and where I was going with those sorts of things. So that worked very well. So came down, started working here in 2001, beginning of 2001, as a research scientist. And then in 2013, having got my PhD, I had the opportunity to go and work as the Director of BIAZA, which is the British and Irish Association for Zoos and Aquarium. So it's a membership body, it's the industry body looking at professional standards and looking to make sure we move things forward in the correct way for zoos and aquariums within the UK. And that was great. It was a really fulfilling job, but it was very, very diverse. And what I realised was that I wanted to get back down to the coalface, as it were, and look and see what we could do within a specific organisation to really make a difference. And I wanted to come back down here. This is a very special part of the country, and Paignton Zoo and Newquay Zoos are very special places as well. So the Wild Planet Trusts and Paignton Zoo and Newquay Zoo really fit the ticket for me.
Okay, so obviously a lot of people that listen to this podcast are probably, generally you think of working with animals, you think of being a keeper. So you've done that kind of dream job in many people's minds. What made you switch from keeper to research? What was that switch for?
For me, it was a bit of a testing my, pushing myself forward a little bit more in terms of my academic capabilities. So I think it depends on your bent, and people learn in very, very different ways. I tend to be a bit more academic in my learning. Other people will learn through experiential learning on the job. So while I was enjoying being a keeper, I really felt to push myself forward, going back and doing some research and really looking at what was going on within my chosen group of animals and using that to push myself in terms of qualification was a really good thing for me. And I think, the opportunity that I was given when I came back down here to work part-time and do a PhD part-time in an area that I loved was absolutely amazing. It was very much about being at the right time at the right place and taking chances. Because I left a job where I had a career path that was potentially laid out in front of me. Turned away from that and came down to work down here in a very new situation and quite a stressful situation in undertaking a PhD. But it has been very, very good. It's taught me a lot about myself. It's given me a lot of experience around the zoo industry more broadly than just being a keeper. And that really has helped.
But am I right in thinking that you kept elements of your keeper because your PhD was on gorillas?
Yes. So my PhD was looking at behavioural interactions between males in bachelor and breeder gorilla groups. The reason that was so exciting was because Paignton had one of the first bachelor gorilla groups within Europe. There was only one other that was started before the Paignton group. So it was very much a learning curve for zoos generally about how to look after gorillas, particularly all male groups, which has been very, very good.
And just for the sake of people who might not know, can you just explain what's the difference between a bachelor group and a breeding group and what situation you want to set those up?
So within Europe, the Western lowland gorillas that you see in zoos are all part of a management programme run by the European Association of Zoos and Aquariums. And why we do that is so that we can manage the population numbers and the genetic health of those animals. What we want to achieve is a safety net of animals. So if we do get a chance to do some reintroductions, and there have been a couple of test cases of zoo-based gorillas going back to the wild, that we can be sure that they're going back with the best genetic setup so that they can survive. That gives them the most chance of surviving. But what we find is gorillas live in the wild in a one male, multi-female group, a harem group, which is a polygynous setup. But the birth-sex ratio is 1-to-1 when you look at, at how offspring are produced. Which means that in a captive situation, you end up with more males. Now, we know that bachelor groups do exist in the wild. There have, since about 2006, there have been documented cases and research done on bachelor groups in the wild. So we know it is a setup that does happen in the wild. But we'd started already testing it out based on some early results from mountain gorillas, looking to see what we can do. So the idea is that we provide a good home for our gorillas. They're not needed for the breeding program at that point in time, but they are still animals that we have a commitment to, and we can look after them and house them well.
Brilliant. That explains that.
There you go.
Perfect explanation there from someone who's definitely in the know.
You've got an entire PhD on it.
Exactly.
Okay, so thinking back to sort of the whole of your career, do you think there's a particular experience that you would pinpoint as saying that's the most influential point? That's the point that made me go, yep, I'm doing what I want to do and where I want to be?
To be honest, I'm not sure that there is. There's a whole range of experiences that I've had growing up, and everyone will have their own experiences to drive from. I think for most of us, at some point, you're sat in some sort of nature surrounding. Mm-hmm. I'm very lucky. I grew up in Devon, so the countryside was around all the time. But I know that the same is true of people who have grown up in inner cities situations, and you just feel, this is where I want to be. I want to be in nature. For me, like I said, I guess if there was something that made it specifically zoos, it was when I started working as a keeper and I began to see the impact that seeing these animals up close can have on the public, and thinking, if we can tap into that properly, then we can absolutely influence conservation on a broader scale, and we can get people to care about the world that's around us. And that's even more important now at the time we're facing over the next 10 years or so, where we've got biodiversity crisis, climate crisis looming. We've got to understand, and we've got to have that love of the world around.
So, interestingly, I think you're probably from the same point of view as me in terms of why you think zoos are important, but you didn't go down obviously for me it was straight away, well, I want to tell people about this, which is why I went down the sort of education route. Did you not, is it your academic side that made you move away from doing something like that?
Yeah, I thought about it for a while, especially when I was a keeper up at Welsh Mountain Zoo. I wondered whether actually going to the education side was good, but I think what I wanted to achieve was I loved working with the animals and having that close experience of being with them, and especially when you're working with apes, and there's a few other species that will say that the same.
Primates are the best.
Primates are.
Two primate keepers, obviously.
But you become part of their world, part of their life. It's an interesting relationship, even when you're working with silverback gorillas, because obviously you're not going to go in and boss a silverback gorilla around, but they do respond to you. They do in those sorts of ways. So it's a really interesting relationship. And actually, that in itself, those human-animal interactions are incredibly important for instilling love about the natural world around us as well. So I was watching the teaching side, but for me the passion was actually being with the animals, and then understanding what was going on with the animals with going into the PhD.
Cool. Okay, so let's come up to present day then. So your current role is as Chief Science Officer. What does that actually mean day to day?
It's a very new position for the Wild Planet Trust, but what it means is, and it's particularly relevant for us at this point in time, is that we're looking at our strategy. So this is about forward planning. So my role is to look at the values of the zoo and look at where we can go and what we can achieve. And as I said, it's a really interesting time for conservation generally, because we're facing such strong challenges going ahead. I truly believe that zoos are an integral part of solving that problem. And I want Wild Planet Trust to be at the forefront of how we do that.
Okay. Strategy. Strategy is one of them words that I always just go, strategy. But how do you make, so you obviously write the actual strategy. How do you then send it forward to everybody on the ground? Is that part of your role, or do you pass that on?
No, it's part of my role, but it's part of the whole team thing here. And it's something that we're at the very beginning stages of what we're doing. So in developing the strategy that we have, or that we're moving along the lines of, partly it's starts off with a vision of what I think we can achieve, but it's not just about me. So I bring my vision and my experience from looking at zoos and working in other zoos and working in the wider world. But then I also tap into the level of experience that we had here. And as you said, we've got any number of experienced people and experienced women working within the zoo that we can tap into. So I'm talking to the education department. I've spoken to you guys about where you think you should be going. I've talked to communications and marketing about where we should be going. I talked to the keepers, obviously, and the curators about where we should be going as well. So what we end up with is something that's condensed. What we've been doing is tying that to some of the other things that are happening in the world around us. So last year we had the COP up in Glasgow around climate change and targets set there. And this year, if it happens, we'll have another COP for something called the Convention of Biological Diversity. Mm-hmm. And there's goals and targets that are being set for that as well. And all of those are goals and targets that relate to us achieving what we need to do within the next 10 years to live in harmony with nature.
Yeah.
And that's where we sit, that we become part of that integral part to meet those goals, to meet those targets, or to help in the meeting of those goals and targets. So our strategy relates around that. What we then have to do, and this is a piece of work we'll be doing over the coming months, is make sure that that goes down. So every part of our organisation understands what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what we're trying to achieve. Yeah. And this is something we're at the beginning of. So the next few months we're going to be developing that a lot more. But those sorts of things will begin to come out.
So I suppose ultimately it's worth highlighting at this point, it's not just about the zoo sites, it's not just about Paignton Zoo and Newquay Zoo, is it? So it's about our approach as a whole charity.
Yeah.
So does it include overseas conservation as well?
So Wild Planet Trust is really fortunate in that it not only has 2 amazing zoos, it also has 3 amazing reserves. So we have the Primley Open Space, the Clenham Private Reserve, which is next to Paignton Zoo, but we also own a National Nature Reserve, which is Slapton Lee down in South Devon, which is an absolutely gorgeous spot. Mm-hmm. We have a range of UK projects, and then we have a range of projects overseas. So we work in Nigeria, Tanzania, Sulawesi, Vietnam, and Zimbabwe.
I'm trying to think of the
other
Africa.
I recently did a project on this, so I've got them all in my head.
So, and that gives us the scope to really influence global conservation and UK conservation. Yeah. I think most people, when they think about zoos, they tend to think about the global stuff, which is great, but the UK stuff is just as important. There's something like 53% of our UK species which are facing serious declines. Yeah. So we have to work here as well. But the principles that we're trying to follow around the Convention of Biological Diversity, around what we want to do in terms of safe havens for animals, in terms of helping habitat restoration, can apply no matter where you're working. How you achieve them and the groups and stakeholders involved with them will be different, but the principles and the goals are very much the same across the board.
Lovely. Okay, so what do you like best about your job? I think I probably know the answer, but what do you like best?
I don't know. I mean, as a scientist, I love a good spreadsheet.
Oh, wow. Was not expecting that.
No, I'm a nerd at heart.
That's the academic coming out there.
Yeah, it is. I think there's a few things, and this is not just my job here, but the career I've had. There's seeing organisations move forward. The last couple of years have been an incredibly difficult time for so many people in so many ways. And we're just beginning to get to the point where we can properly rebuild and look at where we're going. So putting those stones in place so that we've got the right foundation to move forward with is really important to me. And that's coming together quite nicely, or beginning to come together quite nicely now. There's still work to go. But one of the things that I've found particularly rewarding during my career, and you'll know this as well, is where you can see younger people coming into the organisation, taking up roles. So you did a research placement with us a few years back. And seeing those people go on, gain from spending time with us, gain from our passion, our experience, and that's not just me, but it's many, many other people in the zoo. We're an organisation which is completely surrounded by passionate people. Seeing that and seeing new people take on that passion and that drive to succeed and to move forward with the same basic principle of we want to help save the planet is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of us still around from the past
placements.
Not as many as there used to be, but there is quite a few of us around. So as exciting as it is setting the direction of the trust, do you miss practical work, practical on-the-ground work?
Yes, I definitely do. There are days when, especially, this is the sort of job where it becomes all-consuming when you do it as a keeper, and just the idea of going into a gorilla block and smelling the smell, let alone seeing, is amazing, and I totally miss that. Yeah. There are days when when this piece of work isn't happening quite right, and I think, could just go back and clean a den, it would be fine. What I do know now is that the physical aspect of the job, it would take me a while to get back into it. It's been a while since I've done the level of physical work that our keepers do on a daily basis.
Fittest I've ever been when I was a keeper. I could literally eat rubbish all day long and it didn't matter. It was brilliant. So you need to be a keeper.
I was going to say I need to be a keeper. That would help with all this lockdown. This podcast is brought to you by Wild Planet Trust, a conservation charity based in the southwest of the UK with zoos in Paignton and Newquay, local and national nature reserves, and field projects in the UK, Tanzania, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Vietnam, and Sulawesi. You can find out more on our website www.wildplanettrust.org.uk.
So, as I mentioned at the start, obviously today is International Day for Women and Girls in Science. Do you think it's been harder being a woman in your career?
I think there have been elements that that women have to make decisions about around that. And personally, I don't feel that I've ever had any choices go against me because I'm a woman. But I do think that there are choices that women make, and quite often that is around tying in the job around family life and children. Especially as a keeper, it's one of the hard things because, you can't just go home when it's time to pick your child up from school or something like that. There are elements of the job that have to happen. You can't take it home with you. So it does mean that there are difficulties in those ways in terms of progression. And I'm not sure whether I've just been lucky or I just have missed it when some people have sort of maybe dismissed me a little bit because I'm a woman, but I'm also quite vocal. If I feel I'm not being listened to, I tend to make my presence known. So
no points when you thought you wanted to do something and it wouldn't have been an issue if you were a man?
No, I don't think so. I think I was going to say, I think the only time when that has come up is there are occasionally, there's a small cohort of potential old zoo directors.
I was about to say, zoos used to be quite an old boys
network. And there is still that sort of idea that it is, but it's not, it's nothing like what it used to be in sort of like the 80s and the 90s and before the turn of the century. That sounds really old, doesn't it? Way back when. But yeah, there are occasions, and certainly, and one of the really nice things is because part of my work has involved working on a European level as well, so with other zoos in other countries, and seeing the number of women coming up in positions. Yeah. Senior positions. Definitely there has been an increase over the last 5 to 10 years, and that's really nice. And I suspect that a couple of the older style directors are a little bit concerned by it, but
when I think of some of the newer directors that have got the most influence, there are a few women that are definitely the more vocal ones that are having the impact.
Definitely coming through.
That's what I like to hear. Sorry, Ollie.
It's all right. This is the part of the podcast where I just stay quiet.
Okay, so have you got any advice for girls that would be wanting to pursue a career in conservation?
I think, yes, there's several bits of advice that I think we can get, but I think one of the most important thing is, and I think everyone says this, don't be put off and stick with your dreams. Mm-hmm. And I've said at a couple of points in my career, my parents have sort of gone, "What are you doing?" Because that didn't feel like the standard societal way for me to progress with that background, but they were very supportive of it and were happy to go with what I wanted to do, so that I was very lucky in that. I think a lot of people focus on the fact that I have a PhD, and that's great, and it was amazing for me. It was a big learning curve for me about who I am and what I do. It's not the only route into getting to these things. So I think one of the things that I would say is think very carefully about where you're best suited to be as well. And it may be that you are a more academic person, so an academic progression is a very natural thing, but don't be put off if it's not, because I know any number of very, very successful conservationists who don't have PhDs, and they're still able to go out and work very, very effectively in those areas. One thing I would say, which does happen a lot, is that people, if they're not careful, they tend to pigeonhole themselves.
Right.
You think you have this set of skills, and so that's all you can do. Try not to think about yourself in that way. Try and think about yourself as someone who has a range of skills that can be applied to a range of different subjects. So an example of this is I quite often hear about people, say keepers, saying, well, I've been a cat keeper, big cat keeper all my career, what else can I do? Instead of thinking of yourself as a big cat keeper, think of yourself as someone who works in a highly stressful environment and has to pay intense attention to detail to make sure that the environment stays safe, because that's the skill set that's really important and transfers to other things.
Okay,
that's a really good way of looking at it.
That ties back to what we've said before about don't be afraid to change.
Yeah.
If you want to change.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think I'm probably a bit guilty of that, because I always think, right, I've always worked in zoos, mostly in zoo education. What else can I do? But I think it's a very natural thing for people to do. This is what I've always done. How do I change? And changes can be quite scary as well, but it can also be a really good thing to undergo every now and again and test yourself. Was the jump from research to head of BIAZA?
That was intensely scary.
That's
intensely scary, and it depended. I mean, the difference was entirely, absolutely across the board. Because here I was working, I knew the environment, I knew the keepers, I was working with specific animals. I had some exposure to some of the people that I'd been working through the breeding programs that I'd been coordinating one of, so I'd gone to some of the conferences and what have you. But suddenly, at the time when I started with BIAZA, there were about 117 zoos that were members, and suddenly they're all there. They all want to see you. They all want to talk to you about what they want.
Okay.
And you're trying to manage that and the direction of the organisation and our profile on the European stage. So suddenly everyone in Europe wants to talk to you about what BIAZA is doing and where to go and all those sorts of things as well. And it was, the step up was enormous. I like a challenge. But I also had a really good base from here. So my boss, who you will have known at the time, was really supportive. So I had my key people that I could go to and go, oh, God, what have we done? And they would talk down or just bat ideas around and all those sorts of things. And I think that's a really good resource for anyone to have. And it doesn't have to be people of influence. It can be your mum, or it can be someone you met in the pub the other night or something like that. But people that you can rely on to be honest with you and just say, well, have you thought about this? Or do you want to do that? Or just keep going is really, really important.
So you moved back down here for a break then?
I moved back down here because this is an amazing part of the countryside. I had a chance to work at a fantastic place, but also live in an amazing part of the countryside. I mean, you know, it's the English Riviera. I'm a Devon girl as well, so I'm a little bit biased. But we live on the coast. So we've got an amazing marine life. And then just behind is Dartmoor with amazing hills.
Yeah.
And it's just incredible down here. It's fantastic.
We are pretty lucky.
Very lucky. Okay,
this is an interesting one, I think. So if you weren't working in conservation, what do you think you would be? Could be completely anything. Well, I think
this is that transferable skill set coming in now, isn't it?
It is.
Coming full circle.
What can I do? I can do a spreadsheet. That's really difficult. I've always wondered. I've never tried this, and I don't think I've ever really said it out loud to anyone. But I've always wondered if I could be an author and write stories.
Also, novels of fiction.
Novels and fiction, but I like sort of mythologies. So Celtic, UK mythologies, and those sorts of stories. So you know, it might be those sorts of books that I would choose to write. But I have no idea. I can write scientific papers, but it's a bit different from writing a book that people want to read.
You haven't started trying to...
There might be a few little files around my laptop which have a few things on it.
Just in case.
Just in case.
Go for the author route instead. There's no reason why you can't. You could do it alongside. Spend your evenings writing a book.
Yeah, I could do.
Days writing strategies, evenings writing novels.
At some point I'll have to be brave and let someone read them and see if they're any good though.
That's true. I could offer. It's not my...
we'll read them.
There you go.
Okay. If we get to that stage,
We'll
I will let
anonymously
you read them.
release them to the wider staff. Lovely. That is the end of the questions that I have. Ollie, is there anything I haven't touched on that you think is worth?
At the time of recording, we've just come out of a room where we've been watching a webinar with extremely influential people in the conservation space and in government level in countries in Africa. And when I started here and in previous jobs, I never expected those things to happen. And that's just at kind of the lower levels where I'm at in my career. And for example, when I was a tour guide, I was suddenly giving a talk to basically delegates and various different influential people from various countries around the world about a cave, and geoparks, and UNESCO. And I was chatting to these people and holding these conversations, and I'm like, this is blowing my mind, and I better not slip up here because these guys know what they're talking about. And then obviously here at the zoo, I get to be involved in these webinars and chat to people and all sorts of things. So as you go up to being head of BIAZA and things like that, how do you, I suppose you kind of touched on it, but did you ever expect it when you started out? Did you ever kind of aim to be eventually talking to people like that, or did you?
No, and I know various of my colleagues, various of my friends have career objectives. I want to be here.
Yeah.
I've never had that. I like a challenge.
Okay.
So I look for challenges that come up and then go for them. But that can not backfire, but end up in some weird situations. And the BIAZA one is one, because I hadn't really thought of myself as being director of BIAZA until I seriously thought, actually, that's a job. I think I could do it. I think I could do it well. And what that meant was that quite soon after I started, I ended up introducing an evening event in the Houses of Parliament.
Okay.
Which the first time I stood up there and said, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, as the start of my speech, and then my whole speech was just blank in my head. And you know that bit where you just go, just start talking, it's going to be fine.
Yeah.
But just for that split second, there was the, what have I done? I can't do this job. And then you crack on and it's okay. And I think one of the things that the placement student program that we do here teaches you is how to stand up in front of people and talk. You get some experience in how you do that. And over the years, I've had various students say to me, how do you do that? You get up and you talk and you sound confident. How do you do that? How do you not get nervous about it? And so every time I'm nervous.
Yeah.
I'm always nervous about it, no matter who I'm talking to, where it's in front of, or anything like that. But it's recognizing that that's going to happen. I'm going to go through those nerves, and then I'm going to be able to go on and talk about what I know. Because in those situations, I'm the expert. You were the expert talking about the cave and the geopark and what have you. And they're looking to you for your information. So you just come back to this. This is what I know. I'm saying what I know and come through.
That's good advice for younger people.
Yeah, and I think if I were to weigh in on the advice there, is just show your passion for it as well. Because obviously you need to be able to, you've already got all of this stuff in your head, but if you can then convey it passionately, people are that much more willing to listen to you and give you the time and actually take it on board. Well, I think that brings us to a natural conclusion. Obviously, we've got one final question that we ask every time, and that is, what would be your advice now to your 15-year-old self? A classic question for any careers kind of thing.
I don't know, that's quite hard. I think it would be that what you're going to do during life is make decisions that you believe are the best for what you're trying to do. Don't try and second guess yourself too much. If you think that that's the best thing for you to do, then do it. And I think a lot of people sort of look back and go, oh, I shouldn't have done that. But if you can truly, hand on heart, say, well, I looked at all the information and I thought that was the best thing for me to do at the time, you shouldn't really have any regrets, because you're making your choice based on the knowledge that you had. And there are things that I would do differently if I was going back through it. But you do have to try and keep to that. You have your information to hand, make the decision that you feel is best at the time.
Good.
Sound advice.
It's good advice.
Excellent stuff. So that brings us to the natural conclusion of our podcast. So thank you very much for joining us here, Kirsten.
Thank you for inviting me.
Not a problem. You can come on again if you like. So that's where we'll leave it for now. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you, Jo, and thank you very much to everybody listening. Thank you so much for listening or watching our podcast. If you enjoyed it, please consider leaving us a review, or if you're watching, please hit the like button and leave us a comment about your favourite part of the episode. To get more content from Wild Planet Trust, please consider checking out our YouTube channel. You can subscribe there, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter on our website. Of course, you can find Wild Planet Trust, Paignton Zoo and Newquay Zoo on all main social media platforms, and we'd really appreciate you checking those out as well. All that's left to say is thank you very much for watching, and of course we'll see you in the next episode.